this introduction reminds me of a story concerning General Macarthur and Admiral Nimitz during World War II in the Pacific. They were in a fishing boat off the Philippine Islands. Suddenly, a squall comes up and capsized their boat. As it turned out, neither one of them could swim very well, so they both flailed in the water for some time. Finally, General Macarthur climbed back into the boat, and he helped Admiral Nimitz out of the water. "Mac," said Admiral Nimitz, "please don't mention this incident to anyone. I would be absolutely mortified if my sailors discovered that I couldn't swim." "Well, don't worry, Chester," replied the general. "Your secret is safe with me. You see, my soldiers would be shocked if they knew I couldn't walk on water." Now, I believe that geographic setting for that story leads us nicely into our discussion today about World War II. Today, I will reflect on the experience of my specific ethnic group, the Japanese Americans. My presentation will consist of a brief historical review prior to World War II, the tragic and heroic events which occurred during the war itself, the subsequent responses of both the Japanese Americans and our nation, and an opportunity for all of us to help prevent such injustices in the future. Now, first, I'm going to kind of give you a brief language lesson in Japanese. The numbers for 1, 2, and 3 in Japanese are ichi, ni, and san. So repeat after me. Ichi is, 1 is ichi. Ichi. Okay, 2 is ni, and 3 is san. San. Okay, now you can all leave here saying you speak Japanese. Okay. Now, the word for generation is sei, S-E-I, sei. So the term Issei refers to the first generation of Japanese to live in the United States. They're the immigrants who came from Japan. My father was Issei. Their children, or the second generation to live in America, were called Nisei. Keep in mind, these are American citizens who were born in this country. The Nisei were actually the first generations to be born in the country and therefore American citizens. The children of the Nisei, or the third generation to live in this country, are called Sansei. So we have Issei, Nisei, and Sansei. Okay, so the tide of prejudice and discrimination against Japanese in the United States had its origin in the anti-Chinese mania in the West Coast during the latter part of the 19th century, in which Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which effectively limited Chinese immigration to this country. It didn't take long for this anti-Asian feeling to be reflected against the Japanese. In 1900, Hawaii was annexed by the United States. This, in effect, freed thousands of Japanese contract laborers on Hawaii sugarcane plantations, and many of them swarmed to the United States mainland. The Japanese government, noting American concern, dramatically reduced the number of immigrants to America. But in 1905, the San Francisco Chronicle, one of the most influential publications on the West Coast, published the most blatant examples of yellow journalism in our nation's history. The first headline in a series of articles read, quote, "The Japanese invasion, the problem of the hour," unquote. Other headlines warned, quote, "Japanese, a menace to American women. Brown artisans steal brains of whites. Crime and poverty go hand in hand with Asiatic labor," unquote. Now, as a result of those articles, both houses of the California legislature passed a unanimous resolution asking Congress to limit the further immigration of the Japanese. An Asian Exclusion League was formed in San Francisco, and anti-Japanese bills were introduced in every biennial session of the California legislature for the next 4 decades. Now, official sanctions and legislation against the Japanese in America then came in a steady flow. In 1908, the Japanese government was forced to accept the so-called gentleman's agreement with the United States, which restricted the flow of immigration. The Alien Land Law of 1913 prohibited the Japanese from owning land or homes, and further, from leasing land for any period in excess of 3 years. In 1924, the Japanese were barred from becoming naturalized citizens. They could not become naturalized citizens by the Immigration Exclusion Act. Thus, the historical stage was set for the tragic events of World War II, set in motion by the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor. 2 months after the surprise attack, none of the predictions of an attack on the West Coast nor subversive acts by Japanese Americans on the West Coast had occurred. But instead of rewarding the Issei and Nisei for their loyalty, in February of 1942, Presidential Executive Order 9066 permitted the Secretary of War to evacuate all people of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast. It specifically referred to all Japanese aliens and, quote, non-aliens, unquote. In other words, including American citizens. To this day, I still wonder about that phrase, non-aliens. The Issei and Nisei, keeping faith in our democratic processes, obeyed the order of their government and complied in an orderly manner. They immediately sought relief, however, through our judicial system. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court of the United States basically folded its tents and found the order constitutional, thereby ruling against the American citizens of Japanese descent and their parents. Imagine this scenario. You are in your home on a Friday evening, and you get a knock on your door. It is an FBI agent who basically informs you that you must report to the intersection of Winfield Road and Gulf Road on Monday morning at 8:30. You are permitted to bring only 2 suitcases. You have no idea where you are going or how long you're going to be there. That is exactly what happened to the Isseis and Niseis, and most of them did not return for over 3 years. Some of them never. Now, the Japanese, both aliens and citizens, were herded into trucks and buses. There was a total of approximately 120,000, 70,000 of whom were American citizens. Some were put in horse stables at the Santa Anita racetrack. They were then shipped to so-called, quote, relocation centers, unquote, into godforsaken desert areas in states such as Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, and Arkansas. These were actually your basic no-frills concentration camps, with barbed wire fences and towers manned with machine guns, pointing in, not pointing out. The interior of the 10 camps were lined with tar paper shacks. Community leaders, such as ministers and teachers, were separated from their families and placed in separate camps. Able-bodied men were refused induction into the military services. They wanted to join, but they were refused induction and were classified as enemy aliens. In fact, those already in uniform were released or given menial non-combat duties because they didn't trust them. In the midst of all this, the Japanese Americans remained staunchly loyal to their country. They mounted patriotic war bond drives and planted victory gardens in the desolate, barren desert camps. And what wondrous opportunity should then appear at the camps? The local army recruiter asking you for volunteers to go die for their country. Now, I frankly don't know how I would have answered, but the Nisei responded in overwhelming numbers to their country's call to arms. They formed first the 100th Infantry Battalion, made up mostly of Hawaiians, and then the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, with volunteers from the relocation centers from the mainland, as well as more from Hawaii. Others with Japanese language skills joined the Military Intelligence Service, or the MIS. Now, the 100th Battalion and 442nd Regimental Combat Team fought in the European Theater of Operations in Italy, France, and Germany. And I don't have to tell these gentlemen and women from World War II about the 442nd, because they know about it. Because when you're in a combat zone, the reputation of units, good units or bad units, spread like wildfire. You know who the good units are. The records of the 100th and 442nd of valor and gallantry made them the most highly decorated combat unit of its size in the history of the United States Army. These patriots, many of whose wives, mothers, and fathers were living behind barbed wire in the United States, established the following record. Now, keep in mind, a regimental combat team is authorized about 250 officers and 4,000 enlisted. So think about 4,000 people in this unit. Bronze Stars, 4,000, with 1,200 oak leaf cluster. An oak leaf cluster is a duplicate award. In other words, if you have 2 Bronze Stars, you have a Bronze Star with 1 oak leaf cluster. Silver Stars, 560, with 28 oak leaf clusters. Distinguished Service Crosses, 33. Congressional Medal of Honor, 20. Purple Hearts, remember I told you 4,000 in the unit? 9,486. Presidential Unit Citations, 7. The most famous accomplishment among countless exploits was the saving of the so-called Lost Battalion of the Texas National Guard, the 36th Red Bull Division. The Texans had been surrounded by the Germans in rugged mountainous terrain in France, and several units had been sent to rescue the lost battalion, but none had succeeded. Finally, the 442nd was given the task, and after its bloodiest single battle of the war, the Nisei unit rescued the surviving 211 members of the Texas Battalion. But in so doing, the 442nd sustained over 800 casualties. The motto of the 100th and 442nd was "Go for broke," which is Hawaiian slang for shoot the works in a crap game. The Nisei members of the Military Intelligence Service also served their nation gallantly in the Pacific Theater. And we only found out about this within the last 30 years or so because being in military intelligence, they were sworn to secrecy. Their linguistic and cultural expertise contributed immensely to the successful prosecution of the Pacific Campaign. In fact, their contribution has been said by General MacArthur's Chief of Intelligence, Major General Willoughby, to have shortened the war in the Pacific with Japan by 2 years, thereby saving countless thousands of lives on both sides. The result of the Nisei sacrifices in blood was a resounding confirmation of the unquestioned loyalty of Japanese Americans. This was further substantiated by the fact that not one single case of espionage against the United States was ever proven against a Japanese American during World War II. The millions of soldiers who served overseas with the Nisei came back home and told their friends and families about the accomplishments of the Nisei soldiers, and therefore Japanese Americans were more readily accepted into the fabric of American society after the war than they would have otherwise. After the conclusion of World War II, the Isseis and Niseis concentrated on rebuilding their lives. They returned to school, entered new lines of work, and moved to other geographic interior areas of the country, such as Chicago. Although having every right to be bitter, they chose instead to assimilate into our society and to succeed through education and hard work. They subsequently instilled this work ethic into my generation, the Sanseis. They unlocked the doors of equal opportunity closed to them. As a result, we have Japanese Americans in both houses of Congress, and I had the honor to be the first Asian American to command a division in the history of our Army. As you may know, we subsequently have had Army Chief of Staff who is Japanese American. His name is Rick Shinseki, and he is now the Secretary of Veterans Affairs for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And the hard-earned acceptance in society by the Japanese Americans has helped all Asian Americans to gain more opportunity in our society. So today, Asian Americans are successful in every walk of life. Their children excel in school, and they experience significantly lower rates of crime, delinquency, and public welfare than in the rest of society. But there's no inscrutable, mysterious Oriental formula for their success, nor are they innately more intelligent than other racial groups. The basic reasons for the success of this group are emphasis on the family unit, the importance of education, and a spiritual foundation upon which to proceed in life. I would conclude my comments on a very positive note about our nation. In the late 1980s, our Congress passed a law which included a formal apology to the Japanese Americans for the internment and provided for a monetary compensation to each of the remaining living internees. In addition, in 1992, Congress authorized the building of a memorial in our nation's capital to honor the patriotism, loyalty, and contributions of Japanese Americans during World War II to our nation. In 1998, the federal government transferred the to the National Park Service a 3/4 of an acre parcel of land located just a 5-minute walk from the Capitol building for the purpose of this memorial. I had the honor to serve as Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors of the National Japanese American Memorial Foundation, the nonprofit organization responsible for building the memorial, and I'm pleased to tell you that this memorial is now in existence in Washington, D.C. It does not glorify war, nor does it glorify an ethnic group, but rather celebrates the greatness of our nation for recognizing and apologizing for a grave injustice, and to act as a historical educational reminder for future generations. Today, I've attempted to briefly review the history of Japanese Americans in this country during World War II in order to remind us of what injustices we must prevent from ever happening again in this great nation against any of our citizens based on race. I've also been able to publicly acknowledge my personal heroes in life. These gentlemen who served and women who were in the armed forces during World War II of Japanese American descent I stand on their shoulders. I could not have become a general officer in the military if it wasn't for them. They opened the doors of equal opportunity for me. I would also like to publicly acknowledge we have a member of the 100th Battalion, 442nd. The gentleman is sitting right there in the 4th row. And thank you. So I recognize the great service of our World War II veterans. It's been an honor to address you all, and I always close my presentations by asking the good Lord to continue to bless our country, and God bless America. Thank you.